All right, our first lesson is from the book of Ruth. This is a fairly long passage, but after reading it, I wanted to know what happens afterwards, and so I read the entire rest of the book, which sounds like a lot, but really it's only about 8 pages, and I recommend that you read it. It's a good read. And I especially wanted to know what happens to Ruth afterwards, and it turns out that she ends up marrying a guy named Boaz, B-O-A-Z. Remember that for later in the service, Boaz. Okay. Also, a couple other things about this passage that I found interesting. One was one of the names of the women is Orpah, and I thought that sounded a lot like Oprah Winfrey, and it turns out there's a reason for that, because Oprah Winfrey was originally named Orpah from this passage in the Bible, and that's what it says on her birth certificate, but nobody could pronounce it, and they kept screwing it up, and so they started calling her Oprah, and that stuck, and so that's why she's called Oprah Winfrey. Also, there's this lovely piece of verse on the end. It's on the back of my paper, but for you it'll be at the end, and you'll recognize it probably from some wedding vows that you've heard. Okay. During the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man with his wife and 2 sons went from Bethlehem of Judah to dwell in the territory of Moab. The name of that man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the territory of Moab and settled there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Then only she was left along with her 2 sons. They took wives for themselves, Moabite women. The name of the first was Orpah, and the name of the second was Ruth. And they lived there for about 10 years. Then both of the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. Only Naomi was left without her 2 children and without her husband. Then she arose, along with her daughters-in-law, to return from the field of Moab, because while in the territory of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had paid attention to his people by providing food for them. She left the place where she had been, and her 2 daughters-in-law went with her. They went along the road to return to the land of Judah. Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go, turn back, each of you, to the household of your mother. May the Lord deal faithfully with you, just as you have done with the dead and with me. May the Lord provide for you so that you may find security, each woman in the household of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. They replied to her, "No, instead we will return with you to your people." Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Will there again be sons in my womb, that they would be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters. Go. I am too old for a husband. If I were to say that I have hope, even if I had a husband tonight, and even more if I were to bear sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters, this is more bitter for me than for you, since the Lord's will has come out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth stayed with her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back after your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and more so, if even death separates me from you." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about it. Amen. The second reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 17, verses 20 through 24. So this is during the Last Supper, and Jesus is offering a prayer on behalf of the disciples. It also contains the motto of the UCC. This is where the motto for the UCC was taken, which you'll recognize. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one, as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me, and have loved them, even as you have loved me. Father, I desire that those also whom you have given me may be with me where I am, to see my glory, which you have given me, because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Amen.
In his introduction to our first lesson, Mike lifted up the final verses of the reading from Ruth and referred to them as perhaps being familiar because of hearing them at weddings. I love the poetry in those verses. I love the passion that is in those verses. I love the depth of commitment and love that they express. For where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. Is it any wonder that people pick them for weddings, even though they were said by a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law? But still, they are beautiful, beautiful words, filled with pathos. And the whole story really is filled with pathos. Begins with Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their two boys needing to leave their home in Bethlehem because of famine. Except given the culture that day, it wouldn't be Naomi and her husband and their two boys. It would be Elimelech and his two boys and his wife leaving his home because of the famine. The man of the house was in charge of the household and responsible for the household. They arrived at Moab as refugees. Luckily, they were welcomed and they made a home for themselves. And then another tragedy struck. Elimelech died. Naomi's sons became of age and they took wives for themselves. They took wives. Not they got married. They took wives. The sexism of the culture and the reading aside, Ruth and Orpah, Moabites, married Hebrews who had taken refuge in Moab. And then more tragedy struck. The sons died. Now the family was 3 widows. No man to lead and care for them. Not that these women necessarily needed a man to lead and care for them, but the society said, I'm having trouble putting the sexism of the story aside. Still, having heard that the famine was over, Naomi decided to return to Judah. Her daughters-in-law went with her, at least to start. Eventually, Naomi told her daughters-in-law to return to Moab, to return to their birth families. Orpah did this, but Ruth did not. Ruth insisted that she and Naomi were family now, and she would stay with Naomi. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. I can't tell you the number of times I've read stories or heard stories about LGBTQ plus people leaving their birth families and creating families of choice the way Naomi did. In a way, that is what is happening. Ruth the Moabite is leaving her family of birth to be part of her family of choice. Too often when LGBTQ people do this, it is because their families of birth have disowned them. There is nothing to return to if they tried. And so they have sought out family, sought out a place to belong. Imagine cutting off your past, cutting off your childhood, cutting off your entire ethnic identity, and just so you can find a place where you belong. We don't know what kind of family Ruth was leaving behind when she chose to be part of Naomi's family. She might have already been disowned by her birth family because she married a Hebrew. We know that that even happens today when an adult child marries someone of a different race. Whatever her motivations, Ruth covenanted with Naomi to be part of her family, and that covenant is so beautiful. And Naomi made a place for her. Now, I'm not one who is good at memorizing poetry. I'm more likely to memorize a little phrase from somewhere in the midst of a poem. And thanks to Google, I'm then able to go find the rest of the poem, at least some of the time. Well, this story about Naomi and Ruth reminded me of a poem, a line, and it's a short enough poem, I really should have it memorized, but I was able to find it by Edwin Markham. He drew a circle to shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Naomi drew a wider circle that took in Ruth. I hear this same theme in the reading from the Gospel of John in the midst of a very lengthy prayer. It goes on for chapters. It's almost as long as the book of Ruth. Jesus prays for his disciples and for the people who will come to know him through his disciples. His prayer is for unity, that they may all be one. I hear in this prayer a desire for a circle that is wider yet, for a circle that draws in more people, that includes more people, that welcomes more people, as Mr. Rogers would say, exactly or just the way they are. That vision, that hope is one of the reasons why being an open and affirming church is so important. In a world where so many experience exclusion because of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, or their gender expression, in a world where that exclusion is so often justified by bad Christian theology, having churches like ours say, "You are welcome here," is vital. It is life-saving. It is a proclamation of Christ's love and a response to Christ's call for unity. And so I've been wondering, what's next for us? How do we keep our open and affirming covenant alive? What's the next thing we're going to take to make this proclamation? What's the next thing we're going to do to make this proclamation to the Tri-Cities? Well, after worship today, we're going to have a brief town hall meeting in the fellowship hall where, well, it's really going to be a brainstorming session where I'm inviting you to share your ideas of what we can be doing to keep the covenant alive. And to seed your brainstorm clouds, let me share a few examples I've harvested of bold and beautiful ways some other churches are proclaiming their open and affirming commitments. Monson, Massachusetts is in the middle of the state, southern part. That's very rural Massachusetts. And the United Church of Christ in town got, the tornado hit the town, and the steeple with the bell and the clock in it was taken out by the tornado. When they rebuilt, they got a new bell, and they had, you can't read it on the photograph, but on the bell itself it says, "Whoever you are, wherever you are in life's journey, you are welcome here." And they decided they needed to let that sentiment ring out from their church. Federal Way is between, sort of down, there's my pointer, down here. So that's Tacoma, that's Seattle. It's moderately conservative suburb between Seattle and Tacoma. The Wayside Church there has started a group for parents who are queer and a play group for their kids. And the church is also working with some community leaders to plan the first Pride event in Federal Way. In Moorhead, Minnesota, which is on the North Dakota border right near Fargo, the United Church of Christ there has hosted a half-day workshop open to the community about how to be a good ally to trans youth. Based on what they've learned, the church started a peer group for parents of children who identify as a gender other than the one which they were assigned at birth. And the church has also sent GLSEN packets. GLSEN is the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. GLSEN packets to the local middle and high schools in their city, then followed up with the counseling office to make sure that the packets had been received and that the posters had been posted and that somebody on the staff was in charge of creating an affirming presence in the schools. Porterville, California, which is down in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley. Trinity Lutheran Church offered a series of workshops to LGBTQ plus people in the community. The workshops met for 4 Wednesday evenings, not in the church, but in the home of an LGBTQ member of the church. And each session started with dinner, then they had a facilitated discussion and or an art project where both church members and workshop guests got to know each other and shared aspects of their lives. At the center of the workshop was having church participants listen to the stories of LGBTQ plus participants who had been hurt by the church. And on the 4th gathering, they discussed how this church interprets Bible passages that are sometimes called the clobber passages, the passages that are used to shame and attack LGBTQ plus people. The church also has created a brochure about their reconciliation ministry. Reconciliation ministry is Lutheran for Open and Affirming. And they've distributed that brochure at the Porterville Pride Club table at a local community college, and they say that the brochures go like hotcakes. In Dummerston, Vermont, I kid you not, that is the name of the town, Dummerston. But my older sister lives in Belchertown, which is almost as bad, Massachusetts. So Dummerston, Vermont, first thing that church did that they thought was pretty bold and beautiful was they called an openly gay pastor. And then the pastor's partner set up on the parsonage yard some chairs one summer. And there was no pushback. In fact, it was so affirming that the next summer they put them on the lawn of the church. They didn't set them up in winter in Vermont because it snows and you can't see the color of the chairs under the snow. So they figured it had to be a summer activity there. But kind of fun. In June, there's a pride service in Dummerston that the Congregational Church participates in. It includes at least 3 other UCC churches. In Vermont, you can't turn around without your arms hitting a United Church of Christ, I guess. It includes at least 3 other UCC churches and occasionally some other congregations. This rainbow chair thing that they did was sort of a riff on a movement that started in Westfield, Connecticut, and it's called God's Doors. Churches across the country have taken old doors, painted them rainbow colors, and written on them, "God's doors are open to all," and set them up on their church property. the Westfield Church that started this has decided to go beyond doors. Proud to help make your Yuletide gay. I don't know if you can read it, but it says, everybody's welcome at Westfield Church. We don't need a new bell cast at Niles Discovery Church. But I wonder if the LGBTQ parents in our community and their kids might benefit from a place where they can gather to be a support to one another and to play together. And maybe it's time for the fourth largest city in the Bay Area to have its own Pride event. Maybe teachers and students in the Tri-Cities could use some additional support and resources of making their schools a safer place for LGBTQ plus students and staff. Or maybe there are people who'd be interested in a biblical self-defense class. Or maybe we could come up with our own version of God's doors. Or maybe you have an idea of the next step that we could take to keep our covenant alive. On our way to whatever this next thing is, I think it would be good to reaffirm our open and affirming covenant. So I'm going to invite Pastor Brenda to join me up front here. I got to find the right page. From our forming, Niles Discovery Church has embraced as part of our identity the welcome, inclusion, and affirmation of members of the LGBTQ plus community, and declared ourselves to be an open and affirming congregation of both the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and the United Church of Christ. Today, we renew that covenant of inclusion made at our founding. Let us remember our statement of mission. Following the example of Jesus, Niles Discovery Church welcomes all people, grows in our relationship with God and each other, and serves our neighbors near and far.
Bylaws state that one of our core values that undergirds our mission is inclusion, and that we live out that value by being an open and affirming church. I invite you to read that paragraph with me. We live out our open and affirming commitment by expressing God's all-inclusive, extravagant love for all people, regardless of race, age, nationality, physical ability, marital status, family configuration, mental ability, economic status, sexual orientation, immigration status, gender identity and/or expression, religion, faith, or creed.
Let us pray. Wonderful Creator, constant friend, all your people of every sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender identity have the right to live with dignity and without persecution or discrimination. Individually, we each uniquely reflect your glory and express your love. Today, we rededicate ourselves to building bridges of love and hope where harmful divisions have been made, making equity and equality for all people our goal, while working continually for justice, so that everyone can live fully in your love. Amen.